everyone. It's Dr. Kalakamaat, the Power Prophet, and I don't know why my mouth is moving. Okay, it's moving the right way. Hello, everyone. For those of you who have been following these live streams, you know I've been having contact technical issues. So I have to put on my funky glasses today, which I kind of haven't had on in a while. I kind of like them. Well, hello, everyone. Hello. I just want to welcome all the beautiful souls, love and lights. Welcome. Today, I'm doing a presentation or talk on misunderstood emotions. Excuse me. Misunderstood emotions, the spiritual cost. Okay. Yeah. So I know I'm a bit late. Please forgive me. So I'm glad I have this scheduled. I'm going to just see if I'm actually showing up live on my YouTube. So give me a second here. Yep, it's on. It is on. I see myself. Hello, folks. All right. So, yes, today I'm talking about misunderstood emotions and the spiritual cost. Emotional intelligence is it's really important in many more ways than just its corporate function. Okay, they talk about it a lot in corporate jobs, emotional intelligence, self-awareness, regulation, things like that. They're all important, but there are other things that emotions do and allow for and mean at a much more metaphysical level. Okay. And so what I want to do real quick is I have this graphic that I want to show you, because many times when people are asked how they feel, I'm angry, I'm upset, or I'm happy. And this is a feelings wheel. Okay. And these are all on the outer rim here. You can see all of the emotions / feelings that one can go through. And the reason why this is important, not only for the reasons why I said, but in what I do in the transformational resonance work, it's important when we're thinking about what we need to release to transform our resonance. A lot of it is our emotional attachment to the patterns and things we have. And so, for instance, somebody could say, they're angry about having to go to work and overwork, right? And so I don't know if you can see this, but, angry is on here at the very middle of the wheel. There's a black part, and then the first inner ring, it says angry. And then if you go down, let down, humiliated, bitter, mad, aggressive, frustrated, distant, critical. And then say we're at critical, right? I don't know if you're following this, but if you look down, then if we're critical, skeptical, dismissive, right? This gets very specific. And I think it is so important to be specific when we are talking about our emotions, because angry can't just cut it. What angry? Right? So if you're anger and it's bitter, then you might have other ways to talk about that bitterness, like I feel violated. Okay. And then that offers another layer of understanding of yourself as well as others too. And we'll get into that, it's the nuances. When we think about emotions that matter, you just can't get rid of angry, because angry might be bitter. And it might be related to violation. Okay. So to dig deeper and to get as nuanced as possible about our emotions is just very important. I'm not going to keep this wheel up. And many of you may already know about the feelings wheel or the wheel of emotions or emotions wheel. I mean, they're all over the internet. You can pull them up and review it and broaden your emotional vocabulary. That is one of the first steps in growing your emotional intelligence. Okay. And that again is the feelings wheel. All right. And so I have a lot to say on this topic. I know for a fact for many, many years, I could not discern what was happening with me. Right. And so, it wasn't until I began to get nuanced with my emotions to sit in silence, to understand, to really write about, journal about, what exactly about these emotions. And I had the wheel, and the wheel helped me to map out more nuanced feelings that I needed to address. If they were functioning for me well, keep them. If they were not, reframe it in some way that helped this emotional placement serve me better in my life. And so this is, the emotion, the spiritual cost. And today, when I talk about the spiritual cost of not serving yourself better with your emotions, I'm going to talk about all the things that, understanding emotions can do. And so the spiritual cost is not recognizing these things I will offer, and also not having the capacity or the wherewithal or the desire to actually think about how this would operate in your life, especially if you're on a spiritual journey, spiritually awakening, whatever layer, right? Even for myself as also a psychic advisor, having more nuanced understanding of emotions helped me tap in to my clients much, much better and more effectively to discern what's happening in their lives and helping them to gain insights in that session as to what emotions they may be holding that may be restricting their capacity to just flourish in life. So, me and my notes, like when I'm coming up with when I'm attempting to put together a decent live stream, for some reason I just have to write stuff out. Maybe that's the doctor, the PhD in me. And so I have a feeling that this live stream may be done in two parts, because what I have written down is quite a lot. And I don't want to leave anything out, and I don't want to rush through it just to have it fit within a certain time frame. So today my goal is maybe to talk about, I don't know, 30 minutes. Well, I'm long-winded, right? So talk about 30 minutes maybe. Give me a second here. I gotta go off of my reading platform. Give me a second. And get off of here and then put my phone on Do Not Disturb, because it tends to ring. So what? Give me a second. Okay, y'all. All righty, right. Okay, done. So again, love and lights, welcome all. Please know that if something is resonating with you, please comment. I'm not following a chat. I haven't gotten that far in how to manage, YouTube. And there's no chat usually anyway. I'm not claiming that, but anybody wants to chat, I'm here. I'll keep an eye on YouTube, and I will manage it to the best of my ability. You can ask questions. As an educator in higher ed, questions are very important. To fill in the gaps and to make it make sense for the individual, right? And so if there's a comment you'd like to make about the content after the fact, please make it, share, maybe how you see emotions, how they're working in your life. Like, if you're so inspired, I'd really appreciate it. And subscribe to stay tuned for other videos that are up on this channel, okay? All right, y'all. So I'm excited to get into this. I've been wanting to talk about this for a while, but just, wasn't quite sure how I wanted to approach it. So I'm just pulling up my notes, y'all. So I'm going to turn this music down too, because I can hear it and it's kind of doing an injustice to my, to my mind at this point. And plus, this music on Restream is special. So, when people talk about emotional intelligence, it's often they reduce it to a social advantage. Okay. It gets presented as the ability to stay calm, communicate well, read a room, or manage conflict without making things worse. And those things are extremely important, right? Those capacities matter. But that framing, for me, is too small for what is at stake when we think about our spiritual journey and our desire to, realign our resonance and transform our life and purpose, and claim our authentic selves. Understanding our emotions is key in claiming our authentic self. The deeper issue is not whether a person appears composed, right? The deeper issue is whether they are in truthful contact with themselves. Okay. Look, somebody can be highly functional in public and still be estranged from themselves internally. Anybody can show confidence or competence, right? They say all the good stuff. They know what to say. And they're cut off from emotional signals, revealing what they may fear, their desires, what's normalized, and where they have abandoned their own center. Not only that, but it can compromise your capacity to interact more effectively with people, right? Yes, because if we're estranged from our own emotions, what's going to happen when others reveal their emotions to us? And that estrangement and revealing our emotions, wearing them on our sleeves, revealing it, that has consequences. When a person is not in tune with their emotions, they don't appear rational sometimes. And I hate use the word rational, but I just take it from myself. Just back in the day, I fly off the handle. Anything could stir me up in a tornado, in a hurricane. And I know I'm not the only one that has that. So it's not necessarily about being rational as I wrote it, but it's just less accurate, right? Being less accurate. Emotions are not interruptions to reality. They are part of how reality is registered, interpreted, and lived. We can carry information about violation, longing, attachment, meaning, grief, danger, and alignment. Emotions do. Emotions carry this information, and they reveal or disclose what our thoughts alone may try to explain. Like, it can come out. When those signals, those emotional signals are ignored, misnamed, or managed only for the sake of appearances. I remember when I was in higher ed, I was told to wear a mask. I'm like, a mask? I mean, this person said it in all, like I thought it was in the book of what, Goffman, Aaron Goffman, backstage, front stage personas. This is going back way early in my communication training as a student. On the front stage, you wear this mask, and that mask, if you wear it long enough, can do a job on your connection with your own emotions. But it was wear a mask while you're here at work. A little too much for me to wrap my head around, right? And that distortion, if we're in it long enough, and it just becomes a patterned way of life, it shapes our choices, our relationships, how we interpret, and our identity. And over time, a person may no longer know whether they are acting from a place of conviction or conditioning or just adaptation, fear, and even exhaustion. I mean, truly, I can attest to being at a point in my life where I could not discern any of that within myself. And this is why emotional intelligence deserves a more serious conversation than just how it can move you up the career ladder in a corporate setting. It's not simply a behavioral toolkit. It is a technology of the self, a technology of the self. It is part of how we as human beings come to know who we are and how we inhabit our internal life and how we participate in the worlds that we help create and in those worlds we don't help create. And you know, emotions don't arise in a vacuum, right? I mean, you can have stuff in you that all of a sudden, but that's not even a vacuum. That's arising out of experience of something that's disturbing you. You know, emotions emerge from a discursive field. And discursive means like writing or story or narration within histories, social structures, memories, embodied experiences, and other meanings. I mean, emotions actually assist in writing the story a person tells about themselves and the story they'll accept about everyone else. And if the field of our emotions, if that field is not examined, then our emotional life becomes one more site where external realities are internalized and mistaken for truth. We sit in someone else's resonance as to how we're supposed to emote. And we believe that that's how it's supposed to happen. And for the purposes of all of us aspiring to a higher state of being, a higher consciousness, you know, the spiritual and ontological dimensions are profound. And people avoid, don't even know about this connection because what is cultural is much more comfortable than discussing performance, for discussing performance than actual being, human being, okay? Yet emotional intelligence matters precisely because it bears on the question of what kind of self is being formed. And many people live from reaction, you know, fly off the handle, just react. That was me, react, react, react. I swear to God, I was just like, I was just being dragged, flipped around like a cat's toy on a stick, right? Just flapping around. And so, where was I at? I'm sorry, I lost my place in this reading. And emotional intelligence, and many people live from quality personality. Yes, people react, and I still lost it. And that's because many people live from old injuries, and they think that what they're doing in response is discernment. I know I've been hurt, okay? And there are inherited emotional habits. Like there's this stereotype for many Black women that we are emotionless to present invulnerability. It is a coping strategy, survival strategy, right? And it's an inherited survival strategy. And I know from my research and from other Black women, it's just how I am. So understanding emotional intelligence is about looking at the self beneath the fear, okay? A defended identity. or a social role that one can't be extracted from. And more importantly, it's about our willingness to become honest about our emotions, to interact with them. And in that sense, emotional intelligence is inseparable from authenticity because it helps us distinguish between, excuse me, I'm sorry, I had lunch before I came on here, forgive me, to distinguish between what is deeply true and what is just seems comfortable, right? And the other part about emotions is that they're not private. They shape how we perceive others, interpretations of social reality, and how we participate in the collective world, and how we perceive the emotions of other folks, as I said before. A person who cannot tell the difference between intuition or what's inside and projection, you know, their internal world, and then projecting it out onto others. We can misread people. We can misread their emotions. Someone who's being kind to us because we've been violated, we may be suspicious of them and believe they're out to get us. We want to move beyond whatever is that reactionary modality for our emotions and that immediate distress, and look at it on a wider horizon of meaning, and then complexity, like I said, nuances and responsibility. Okay. And for this live stream, you know, I'm not using emotional intelligence as a corporate buzzword because that's where it is used quite a bit, or for a checklist so you can behave better. You know, we need to consider what it means to treat emotions as information, conscious experience, and part of the soul's movement toward truth, the true self as well. When we're not in tune with our emotions, look, it's not just about having poor communication or poor reactions. You know, it could be our entire life being organized around misrecognition. Can you imagine that? And that happens. And so I have various dimensions of what emotional intelligence provides, so we can consider the cost, the price of not being more in touch with our emotions, with our inner worlds, how emotions shape us, our perceptions, and how we may be projecting them onto others. Okay. And so I'm going to start off with the ontological status of the self. And like I said, you know, this is probably going to be a two-part because I'm already at 23 minutes. This is such a profoundly awesome place to sit because there's just so much wisdom and information in this area. So we're going to talk about the ontological status of self, the nature of being. Okay. And so emotional intelligence becomes far more consequential when it is understood as a technology of the self rather than just interpersonal skills. Okay. Technology of the self as opposed to interpersonal skills, although emotional intelligence is both and. Okay. And in that frame, emotions are not incidental feelings that interrupt thought or require management so that the real self can remain in control. I mean, yeah, we want to get there, but really, you know, emotions are part of the mechanisms, part of the medium in which or through which the self is formed. ontological understanding is being, of how the self, the being, is formed, interpreted, and enacted, right? Acted out. Emotional life is where experience becomes meaning, right? What are you going to do? Just think about something and go to the park and just think about the trees and the lake and the geese, and not sit in your happiness or discern your happiness at being there, or your release or your comfort. You know, I mean, that's serious separation from self. So, yes, emotional life is where experience becomes meaning. And our perception is filtered through memory and value, because in the perception of memories and what they are of value, what value they have, there's an emotional piece there. And also identity. There's emotional component to the forming of identity over time. Like, sometimes we take up our identity and we're like, oh my God, I hate this. Or may not even know we hate it. We hate being a caretaker, but you're just in it because that's what we're doing. Right? And quietly over time, it just became who we are. And many times folks don't even think about their emotions because they're just in the routine, the pattern, the habit. And those emotions tied to that quietly organize our identity over time. Right? There could be joy in that. And there could be this complete sense of feeling threatened in that identity or that role. Okay. And this is why emotions are seen, particularly through my eyes as a communication scholar, as a discursive field, a field of stories. You know, they express what a person is, and they help produce what a person knows about themselves, how that person places others or locates others, and how we make sense of the world in which we inhabit. You know, shame, fear, longing, grief, resentment, and tenderness are not just isolated inner states. You know, these things and emotions are also carriers of intergenerational narratives, inherited narratives, as I said before, and expectations, judgments, and histories. And, you know, and these emotions give us the feeling of what is possible for ourselves, what we have permission to do, and what is truly aligned with ourselves. And look, seen in this way, you know, emotional intelligence is the capacity to examine how one's emotional world is structured, right? And that's important when we talk about the ontological status of the self, and being aware of how our emotional world is structured. You know, we can determine whether or not that structure reflects truth or distortion. Okay. And that's awareness. It's interpreting yourself, your feelings. And it is regulatory, right? Because, you know, once we can discern what's happening, maybe we can do something about those reactions or those poor feelings, the feelings that are low frequency feelings. And so the ontological status of being is about becoming more conscious of the emotional language through which our reality is being organized within us. Okay? Within us. And that's awareness, because it could change personal identity. You know, once we understand the ontological status of being through our emotions, We can make shifts in our personal identity. We can make shifts in our social participation. Because it's no longer about confusing your emotions, your true emotions, with those emotional responses that we have been conditioned with. And that is essential for selfhood, for being. And in that distinction, our emotional life, as it should be always, becomes a site of inquiry, of questioning. And it could help facilitate profound personal reconstitution. Ontological state of being. If we're being in a resonance where we can't see or know ourselves because we're conditioned with something else, our being is a packaged formation, structured through a package. So it is essential to make inquiries of our own emotions and think about ways in which perhaps areas in our life that need to be reconstituted because they've been based on emotions that may evolve from cultural scripts, social scripts, systems, and also normalized forms of domination. Okay? That's a whole nother conversation. So the next category, so that was the ontological status of the self. I mean, how many of us really think about emotions as playing a role in ourselves' ontological status? And that is how we come into being, how we know we're being, right? And how that being takes shapes and is acted out in real time. And so the next area, self-awareness as inner power. And so usually self-awareness is a reflective skill. Journal, become aware, right? We get some insight, grow up, make some better decisions. Okay, that helps. That works. At a deeper level, though, self-awareness is a form of inner power. Self-awareness is inner power because it changes. Let's just say it can change the terms on which a person lives. And I say can because when I was in college, they used to say, we used to always have this little rhetorical thing to think about. Knowledge is power, which I never believed in. People could be self-aware. That does not make anyone powerful. The powerful is in some act to resolve the self-awareness with things that actually need to change or with change, right? So information is not knowledge unless it is used. It's not power unless it is used. So someone who can identify, what is being felt and understanding or recognizing what activated that feeling, right? And distinguish it from the present reality and old internal residue is far less vulnerable to being driven by impulse. Impulse, just doing it, reacting, impulse. And that removes us from being driven like that cat toy sweeping around, from being driven, being at the mercy of our moods, our projections of people. We're projecting our own stuff on people. And our reactions, our unexamined reactions. Like sister girl came in the door and asked you for a tissue, and you just went off about the tissue. Unexamined reactions. The tissue was not the thing that made the person go off, right? When you have this self-awareness and activate it, you get a greater capacity to choose your response with clarity. Can you imagine choosing how you respond, if you respond? And the if is really shaky here, because people want to respond to restore their sense of power, to push back. It's like, I gotta say something. No, you don't. You don't. Self-awareness interrupts those automated things, right? And opens a more intentional relation with the self. So that's self-awareness as power. Oh, got one more little thing here. You know, if we're looking at it as an intentional relationship with the self, I just want to give this little bit here. I had it as a footnote, but I'm going to say it. You know, in that sense, emotional intelligence functions. It is a guide to our inner authority. And, you know, self-sovereignty is a really big thing for the work that I do. You know, it helps us align action with what is most deeply true, as opposed to what is an immediate stimulation, right? We move and act from a higher self, our highest self. And that's not through emotionally detaching from people, disassociating, or having some guise of superiority. You know, the inner authority that is offered through emotional intelligence sort of removes a lot of the fragmentation we may have in ourselves, the incoherence of self and the things we do. You know, in that respect, we don't confuse intensity with truth. Intensity with truth. Who said they go together? Or wisdom with like urgency, right? Who said those go together? You know, we can feel angry without throwing away our discernment. We can actually feel fear without letting it override us in the moment, dictating everything about what we do and what we don't do. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to stay present when something feels uncomfortable, without some quick reaction to get away from it, or to go into some defensive mechanism, a reaction. And that is why self-awareness is power, right? Because it affords us access to us in a way that reduces internal incoherence, internal confusion, and it supports more deliberate action, more controlled. That's what self-sovereignty is, inner authority is, having control over self. Not in a way where you're oppressing yourself, but you just are better able to understand and dictate what's coming forward and what's not. And so the next one is unity of emotion and being. Okay, emotion and being. We talked about this with the ontological status of the self. And I'm not going to repeat anything that I said there. But, you know, to say differently, emotion is part of the structure of conscious life. And I think I made that clear early on, right? Like, we can't just have neutral minds. Like I said, going to the park, looking at the trees and the birds in the lake and having absolutely no emotion. I mean, that happens, but actually having no emotion of happiness or comfort in experiencing these things. You know, experience is already, it has a texture of affect. Affect is emotion. And by orientations toward what is happening within us and outside of us, right? And to extend the ontological discussion, emotions are part of how existence is registered and lived, okay? And so emotional death is attached to bodily sensation, right? We talked about being. One state of that is emotions, like we always think emotions is mental, but there is a bodily component which we have to be aware of that is absolutely necessary to truly experience emotions, right? And so we feel a tightness in our chest or our stomach drops. It could be the warmth of relief, right? And we could feel heavy with sorrow and exhaustion or burned out, you know? These are all like textures of emotion embodied and understanding these bodily sensations. And so the body does not simply display emotions after the fact, right? No, we know this, right? I mean, it is one of the primary sites, our body, through which emotion becomes available to consciousness. When people lose contact with bodily sensation, and there are a lot of us out there, right? They often lose their ability to be emotionally aware in a precise way. Okay? Like I said, people just talk about angry, right? Emotion abstractly, while remaining estranged from its lived reality, right? Angry. The lived reality, like I said, could be, you know, feeling violated. That's the lived reality. And to recover the unity of emotion and being, you recover the body as a locus of knowledge. What the heck does that mean? That are folks thinking about their body as a locus of knowledge, as a fulcrum, a center point of knowledge, or place of knowledge? I didn't, and I know I couldn't have been the only one having that disconnect. So, to recover the unity of emotion and being, we have to recover the body as a locus of knowledge. It is to understand that feeling is not opposite of thought. Like I said, it's not the brain. But in being in the body, one of the ways that life discloses to us are emotions. So emotions, you could think about them, but there are bodily sensations. And of course, there's always the nervous system. Okay, and that's another discussion about how our emotions live in the body and fundamentally impact our nervous system, right? And we know the nervous system is a key player in inflammation in our bodies. And that inflammation has been connected or is linked in the scientific research to all sorts of chronic diseases, cancer, addiction of all types, you know, lupus, fibromyalgia, Our body is one way in which emotions are disclosed to us. Okay? And it's very important. And I'm not even going to get into the release component of the power of release in the discussion, but this stuff is embodied. And to deal with emotions that are not serving us, we really have to understand where they're sitting in our body. Okay? The next area is wisdom and self-transcendence. Emotional intelligence reaches its highest expression when it matures into wisdom. And so wisdom begins where self-absorption loses its grip. And I would say where ego loses its grip. It requires the ability to stand within one's experience without being confined just to that experience. And that's how a lot of people operate. They take what they know, and that's everybody's knowing, or should be. And so self-transcendence in this respect is really critical here, because human beings are often tempted to interpret reality through the narrow horizon of their experience, immediate distress, things that are approximate relation to them. And pain can make the present feel total, like everything is pain. So emotional intelligence deepens into wisdom when a person develops interior steadiness, internal steadiness, okay? Place of peace, right? And are able to acknowledge their own emotional reality. And maybe even asking, is this true? Or what else is true? Am I implicated? Is there someone else implicated? And what is the appropriate response? Not reaction, response to something urgent in the moment. And urgent doesn't mean calling the ambulance like urgent, right? It could be an argument. It could be kids running around driving you crazy. It could be you driving you crazy. It could be anything that feels urgent in the moment. And so a person capable of self-transcendence can hold their pain without saying, or what we call catastrophizing, without absolutizing it, making it everything. I live like that with racism. Everything. I mean, I still hold that same belief, but it no longer rules me in everything I see. Right? And so it creates the internal conditions for resilience. And that is really important, because if everything is what I'm feeling, then that's no resilience. How are you going to bounce back in a perception and a reality that is just all about your pain? There is no bounce back. There is no resilience. And so it allows us to have a more expansive field of truth in reality than just this thing that we're feeling by ourselves, within ourselves. That wisdom opens us up so we can transcend the self. And so those are just some areas, okay? And I didn't want this to be long. I wanted it to be an hour. So what this conversation about emotional intelligence, I hope makes clear, is that it requires more thought than what you may have given it. Okay. Um, it's involved with the formation of self, like our kids growing up, the babies, right? The forming of the self, how we make sense of our emotional lives, and these sensations within the body, the conscious experience of those emotions, and moving from reaction to response and intention and to wisdom, like actually being grounded in discernment and care and compassion. So all these things together, these dimensions place emotional intelligence as a way of knowing and inhabiting reality more truthfully. And this is why I'm talking about it. We can't make any changes in our life if we are not recognizing what is true within us. We can examine emotional structures through which our identity has been shaped, and others, if you make that inquiry out there, in our children. Those emotions become a source of information, not just something to get over. A source of information, right? Somebody's crying. Somebody's like, oh, be quiet. You're not going to cry. No, yes, cry. What? I was at a job working in recovery. And one of the clients in this residential rehab was just having a cry situation just flowing. And one of the aides came over and was like, stop crying. Was wiping her face off, stop crying. I'm like, what are you doing? Let this person cry, right? And then we could take a moment of reflection to discern and assess with her what's happening. I mean, granted, somebody's running around and killing people out of emotional reaction. We got to stop that. Or breaking up our house. I mean, these things are overboard. But some emotions just have to be like somebody's angry. Somebody keeps poking at them. What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? And especially if they're angry because they feel violated. And somebody's just poking at them, poking at them, poking at them, poking at them. That's enough to make somebody go crazy. Enough to make that angry person fly off the handle. Let somebody be angry. Let them be. But everybody's got to fix things, get involved. No, let someone feel their anger. Let them go through it and then follow up. Right? So emotional intelligence opens us up to a broader understanding of human connectedness, where emotional awareness actually becomes part of how one behaves, acts, thinks, participates in a reality that is much larger than themselves. And in this respect, in a reality much larger than themselves, that is aligned with their true self, that resonates with their true self. That is what this inquiry, emotional inquiry, does, right? And so today I presented all these areas, not to tell you what you're missing out on completely. I mean, as far as bad, no, but to show the areas that if we don't attend to our emotional life, emotional health, we are missing out. And so the next live stream will address the problem of emotional distortion, okay? Because that's a real big one. How people misread emotions in themselves and in others. And also, I may take a little bit of time to begin moving into the observer consciousness, which is the ability to observe one's own emotion and then step outside of them to learn and then become more intentional about their emotional visibility or inner life in real time, which is crucial for distinguishing between one's true self, right? And then a temporary emotional state. That temporary self is just a resonance that isn't necessarily aligned with your authentic truth. Okay. And so, yes, this live stream today was really to begin the discussion of emotional intelligence. I hope in many ways, in some way, that it was helpful to someone somewhere. And if so, it's really, it would be phenomenal to share, what resonated with you, what resonated from this live stream with you. So please make a comment and like and subscribe. I always sort of diminish the like and subscribe because I'm like, who am I to ask for a like and subscribe? No, like the video and subscribe to my channel. That's an old pattern of low self-worth, insecurity. So please make a comment on your takeaway from this or how it resonated with you. Like the video and subscribe to my channel. All right. So usually I go through all the QR codes. I will go through one. So while I'm sitting here, I'm going to do this one. Okay. Where's my QR code? Because, we have a sale going on right now. And I think it's important that folks know, we have psychic advising sessions and also transformational resonance sessions, not the whole program, but just, some pieces of the work that we do in the program. There are sessions that we offer. And so these are 75% off for first-time clients. Okay. So there's a QR code. It takes you directly to my website. And all of the 75% sessions have a star located on them. You pay for the session, and you need to have your invoice number for making that payment. And you book your session, which requires you get your time in your day, which requires that invoice number to do that. Yeah. It's a workaround, right? Some of us start businesses and we don't have a nest egg somewhere and we're not retired, right? So 75% off. Take advantage of it, y'all. So look, thank you, beautiful souls, for stopping by. And I'm actually getting done in 1 hour, if not sooner today. I'm going to bring your attention back to the feelings wheel, which we all need to become extremely familiar with so that we can discern the complexity and nuances of our emotional life and the emotions that we inhabit within ourselves, right? Within our bodies, within our minds. Okay, this is the wheel. I love the emotions wheel, the feelings wheel. And I also love having the opportunity to come and share what I know with you. I mean, in my field of communications, emotion is very, very central because we think about sending and receiving messages. When you send them and receive them, I'm not talking about the channel the message flows through. I'm talking about how it functions in the mind. When we're sending a message, there's an emotional import attached to it. When we're receiving it, there's an emotional import to it, right? So, and that is really tied to intrapersonal communication. But as we have discerned, emotions have a much higher purpose than intrapersonal components, okay? Yes. So I'll be back next week with a follow-up video to this, and I will advertise it, okay, on the site, on the channel. And again, thank you all beautiful souls for sitting in this now or sitting in this later. I hope that you were able to find something or hear something that hit home. Thank you so much. And I hope that we all can feel the power of release. Thank you. Be blessed. Thank you.